I thought I was the one who never got caught off guard. 31 years with Canada Post. Rain, snow, -30 on the highway between Sudbury and Espanola. I delivered through all of it. You don't do that kind of work without learning to read a situation before it reads you. You notice things. A dog behind a fence before it barks. Ice under fresh snow. A neighborhood that shifted in the 3 months since your last route change. I prided myself on that. The noticing. So when my son-in-law showed up on Father's Day with a box wrapped in craft paper and a blue ribbon, I noticed the way he carried it. 2 hands. Careful. Not like a man handing over a bottle of wine or a gift card in an envelope. Like something inside mattered to him specifically. His name is, well, I'll call him my son-in-law because that's what he is to me, and that relationship is the only thing that still feels relevant to this story. My daughter had been with him for 11 years. They'd given me 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl, ages 8 and 5 at the time. I had no reason not to trust him. I had every reason, actually, to be grateful for him. He set the box on my kitchen table and told me to open it. Inside was a home security system, one of the nicer ones. Not a single camera, but a whole kit, a hub the size of a thick paperback. 3 cameras, a doorbell camera, 2 motion sensors, all the same brand, all connected through one app on your phone. He'd even printed out the setup instructions and put them in a clear sleeve, like he'd thought it through, like he wanted me to actually use it. He said, "Dad, you're out here alone. I worry." I live in a bungalow outside Barrie, Ontario, about 20 minutes from town. I bought the place after my wife passed in 2019, smaller than what we'd shared for 34 years, but manageable. Good neighbors on one side, bush on the other. My daughter had expressed concern about the location before. Too far if something happened, she'd say. And I'd always told her I was fine. When her husband said he worried too, it felt like they'd talked about it together. Like this was the joint decision, the thoughtful one. I thanked him, and I meant it. He helped me set it up that afternoon. 2 cameras on the exterior, one facing the driveway, one over the back door, one in the front hallway, inside. The doorbell camera at the entrance. He walked me through the app, showed me how to check the live feed, how to set motion alerts. He seemed relaxed about it, happy even. Like a man who'd solved a problem that had been bothering him. When they left that evening, my granddaughter waved from the back window of the car all the way down the driveway. I stood there watching until I couldn't see the taillights anymore. I went inside and felt the particular quiet of a house that had just been full. I used the system exactly the way he showed me. Checked it in the mornings. Occasionally glanced at the hallway camera when I got up in the night, more out of novelty than necessity. The alerts worked. Once it caught a fox crossing the driveway at 3 in the morning. I almost sent the clip to my daughter before I thought better of waking her. About 3 weeks after he set it up, my old friend Lorne came by. Lorne and I go back to 1987. We met at a hockey league in North Bay. Both of us played defense, both of us were mediocre at it, and we'd been friends ever since. He retired from the Ontario Provincial Police 5 years ago, 28 years of service, mostly in digital forensics, toward the end of his career. He doesn't talk about the job much, but you never fully stop being what you spent 3 decades being. He came for lunch. We ate. We talked about his daughter's new house in Guelph. We talked about whether the Leafs would ever, and that's a conversation without a satisfying ending, as any Canadian knows. After lunch, he asked to use the washroom, and on his way back through the hallway, he stopped. He was looking at the camera. not the way most people look at a security camera. That brief glance of acknowledgement. He stood there for a moment, head slightly tilted, the way he used to get when something wasn't adding up. He came back to the kitchen and sat down. "Who set that up?" he asked. I told him. "My son-in-law, Father's Day, the whole kit." Lorne nodded slowly. He asked me if he could look at the app on my phone. I handed it over without thinking much of it. He scrolled through quietly for a moment. Then he set the phone down on the table, face up, and looked at me. "Do you know who has administrator access to this system?" he said. I didn't understand the question at first. I said, "I do. He set it up under my account." Lorne shook his head, not dramatically. Just the small, careful shake of a man who's delivered bad news before and knows that tone matters more than content in the first few seconds. "There are 2 admin accounts," he said. "Yours, and one that was registered when the system was first activated, before your account was added." He explained it to me the way he always explains things, simply, without condescension. The system had been activated at some point before I received it. A primary account had been established. My account was added as a secondary administrator. Both accounts had full access to every camera in the house. Live feed, recorded footage, motion history. I sat with that for a moment. He said, "I'm not telling you something is wrong. I'm telling you something worth understanding." But I had already started understanding it. The way you understand something you didn't want to know. Slowly at first, then with a kind of cold clarity. I asked Lorne what he thought I should do. He said, "Nothing yet. Don't touch it. Don't say anything. Don't change settings. Don't delete anything. Just let me make a few calls this week and find out what we're looking at." I told him I could do that. After he left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The hallway camera was visible from where I was sitting, just past the doorframe. The small lens, the blinking light that meant it was active. I'd looked at that thing every day for 3 weeks and seen it as protection. Something my son-in-law had installed because he cared. I looked at it differently now. The hardest part of the following 10 days was not reacting. My daughter called twice. My son-in-law called once. Said he'd been thinking of coming by to check that the motion alerts were calibrated properly, now that summer was moving in. I told him that sounded fine, that I appreciated him thinking of it. My voice was even. It surprised me, actually, how even it was. I'm not a man who's ever been accused of hiding what I feel. My wife used to say I had the least readable poker face she'd ever seen. But something settled in me during those 10 days. Something that wasn't anger, exactly. More like resolve. Lorne came back on a Thursday. He brought a colleague with him, a woman he'd worked with in the OPP, now in private practice doing cybersecurity. She looked at 60 of cybersecurity. She looked at the system more thoroughly than Lorne had. She connected her own device, ran some diagnostics, asked me a few questions about whether I'd ever changed the default network password, whether I'd noticed anything unusual on my home internet. She sat down at the kitchen table with Lorne and me and told me what she'd found. The primary account linked to my system was registered to an email address that was not my son-in-law's personal email. It was a separate address created specifically, but the account had been used to access the cameras. Regularly, the access logs showed connection times that matched, with some frequency, the hours between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. Weeknights mostly. She told me the hallway camera had the widest field of view. It covered the entrance to my home office, where I keep my files, my mail, my computer. She didn't have to say the rest. I'd been depositing my pension into the same account for 6 years. I had a small RRSP I'd never touched. Money I'd told my daughter about once in a conversation about what would happen to it when I was gone. I had the deed to the house. I had a will that named my daughter as sole beneficiary, which meant that whatever I had would pass through her, which meant it would, in practical terms, affect her husband as well. I have never thought of myself as wealthy, but I own my home outright. My pension is comfortable, and someone had been watching my hallway for 10 days, possibly longer, possibly from the very day the cameras went up. Lorne said, "You need to talk to a lawyer before you do anything else." I called my solicitor the next morning, a man I'd used for the house purchase and for my wife's estate. Someone I trusted. I told him the situation. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Come in tomorrow. And don't move any accounts, don't sign anything, and don't tell anyone you're coming in." I didn't. What my solicitor helped me understand, over 2 appointments, was that I was in a position many people don't realize they're in until it's too late. In Ontario, if someone can demonstrate that an older person lacks the capacity to manage their own finances, they can apply to become their guardian of property. It's a legal process. It's a legal process. It takes time. But the groundwork for it, the documentation, the pattern of behavior, suggesting confusion or poor judgment, that groundwork can be built quietly, over months, through observation. Surveillance, in other words. He wasn't making an accusation. He was explaining a mechanism, but I heard him clearly. He helped me update my will with a small but significant change. He helped me establish a power of attorney with a different family member. My nephew, on my side, a man I've known since he was 12 and trust without reservation. He advised me to open a secondary account at a different institution and begin directing a portion of my pension there. Quietly, legally, all of it above board. He said, "If someone is building a picture, we're going to make sure the picture they have access to is incomplete." I did everything he said, methodically, over the following 3 weeks. And then I waited. The call came on a Tuesday evening in late July. My son-in-law said he and my daughter had been talking. He said they were concerned about me, that I'd seemed forgetful lately, a little scattered. He mentioned carefully, the way someone mentions a thing they've been rehearsing, that they'd noticed I'd been slow to respond to messages, that I'd confused a date about a grandchild's recital, that they were just worried. He asked if I'd ever thought about whether living alone out there was still the right situation for me. He said they could help me look at options, that there were some beautiful retirement communities in the Barrie area, and that if I ever wanted to simplify things, the house, the finances, they were there to help me navigate that. I let him finish. Then I said, "I appreciate that. Let's talk about it when you come by Friday." He sounded relieved. He said that sounded great. I called Lorne after I hung up. I told him what had been said. He listened without interrupting. "Friday," I said. "Bring your contact." Lorne asked, "You sure you want to do it that way?" "I'm sure," I said. On Friday, my son-in-law arrived at 11 in the morning. He came alone. "My daughter was home with the kids," he said. He sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Lorne had sat 2 months before, and asked me a question that changed the way I saw my own home. He started talking again about retirement communities, about simplifying. He had his phone out, had done some research, wanted to show me some options. I let him get about 3 minutes in. Then I told him I knew about the second administrator account. I told him I knew about the access logs, the connection times, the hours. I told him I'd spoken to my solicitor. I told him the will had been updated, the POA had been assigned, and the accounts had been restructured. He went very still. I want to be honest about how that moment felt. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like grief, actually. The particular grief of watching someone's face when they realize the performance is over, and what's underneath the performance is something smaller and sadder than you wanted it to be. He's the father of my grandchildren. He will always be that. Whatever he was trying to do, that fact doesn't change. He started to explain something about financial pressure, a business decision that hadn't gone the way he'd hoped, debt that had accumulated. He said he hadn't meant for it to go as far as it had. He said he was sorry. I told him I believed him, that he was sorry. I told him it didn't change what had happened, or what came next. What came next was that my daughter needed to know. That conversation, the one between the two of them, and then between her and me, was harder than anything involving lawyers or accounts or access logs. My daughter is not a person who was part of this, I am certain of that. The look on her face when I told her, the way she sat with it, the weeks afterward, she was blindsided. Completely. She's still working through it. We talk more now than we did before, actually, which I didn't expect. The police were involved. I won't go into the details of how that process unfolded, because it's ongoing and there are things that aren't mine to say publicly yet. What I can tell you is that the system has been taken down. Every camera, the hub is gone. My hallway looks different without it. Lighter, somehow, even though it was a small thing mounted near the ceiling. I had my nephew come by and look at everything. My internet router, my computer, my accounts. He spent a Sunday afternoon going through it all methodically. The way he does things, he's an engineer, careful by nature. He set up a new network, changed every password, made sure there was nothing left that gave anyone else a window into my house. And then it was just quiet again. The same quiet as before, but different. I've thought a lot about what I should have noticed, whether there were signs I missed. The way he'd always seemed a little more interested than necessary in the house, how much I'd paid for it, whether I had a mortgage, what the property taxes looked like in this part of Simcoe County. I'd taken it as the natural curiosity of someone becoming family. Maybe some of it was that. I don't think the whole of a person is defined by their worst decision. But I also know now that interest in someone's finances, dressed up as concern for their well-being, is worth paying attention to. I also know this. If Lorne hadn't been the kind of man who notices things, if he hadn't spent 30 years in a job that trained him to ask the question nobody else thought to ask, I might not have known until it was too late. The access logs would have kept running. The picture being assembled in the dark would have gotten more complete. And one day, someone would have walked into a lawyer's office with an documentation suggesting I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs, and I might have had a very hard time proving otherwise. That's the thing about this kind of plan. It's patient. It doesn't need you to do anything dramatic. It just needs you to keep living your life while someone else quietly takes notes. I'm telling you this not because I want sympathy. I have a house, a pension, my health, and people who love me, including my daughter, who is one of the strongest people I know, and is proving it. I'm telling you this because I think a lot of people my age get gifts they don't fully understand. Smart devices, tablets, new routers, apps that help manage things. And most of the time, those gifts are exactly what they appear to be. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes, there's something else. Know who has access to your home. Know what your devices are doing. And if someone you trust says something feels off, don't dismiss it just because the thing that's off came wrapped in good intentions and a blue ribbon. Trust is not the same as proof, and kindness is not the same as care. I keep coming back to that Friday morning at the kitchen table. Not the conversation with my son-in-law, the one before it, the one with my solicitor, where he laid out what could have happened if Lauren hadn't stopped by for lunch on an ordinary Thursday in June. If he'd used the washroom and come back and said nothing. If I'd gone another 6 months checking that hallway camera every morning and feeling safe. The thing about consequences is that they don't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they accumulate in the background, quiet and patient, while you're going about your life. My son-in-law wasn't reckless. That's what I've had to sit with. He was careful. He had a plan, and he worked it slowly. And if one retired OPP officer hadn't tilted his head at a blinking light near my ceiling, the plan might have worked. That's not a comfortable thing to admit, but it's true. And I think the truth of it matters more than any comfort I could offer myself. What stopped it wasn't luck, exactly. It was character. The character of a man who spent 30 years being paid to notice things and never stopped noticing, even after the job ended. Lauren didn't have to say anything. He could have told himself it was none of his business, that he was probably wrong, that raising it would make lunch awkward. But he'd built the kind of integrity that doesn't go quiet just because the moment is inconvenient. That's what I mean when I think about what honesty actually costs a person. It cost Lauren something to sit down at my table and ask that question. He knew what the answer might mean for me. And then there was the part I had to do myself. The 10 days of not reacting. The calls with my daughter where my voice stayed level. The appointment with my solicitor where I had to listen carefully and think clearly about a situation I very much didn't want to be in. I'm 67 years old. I delivered mail in -30 weather for 3 decades. I like to think I know something about showing up and getting through. But this was a different kind of endurance. The kind that asks you to hold still when every instinct says to move, to think when you'd rather just feel, to be strategic when you're also, underneath it all, heartbroken. I don't think my son-in-law is entirely a bad man. I think he made a choice that revealed something he may not have fully known about himself. That under enough financial pressure, he was capable of something he'd never have admitted to in calmer times. Most of us don't know what we're capable of until the circumstances arrive. The question is whether we've built enough of a foundation, enough of a habit of doing right by people that when the pressure comes, that foundation holds. His didn't. And the consequences of that followed as naturally as anything follows anything. What I want to say, not as a lesson, just as something I know now that I didn't know before, is that the 3 things that carried me through this were simple, and none of them were dramatic. It was the steadiness to do what was right even when I was angry. It was the clarity to understand what was actually happening instead of what I wished was happening. And it was the willingness to keep going, appointment by appointment, phone call by phone call, long after I would have preferred to just sit down and stop. None of those things protected me on their own, but together they were enough. I still talk to my daughter every few days. The grandchildren came by last weekend. My nephew reset my router and made me write down the new password and tape it inside a kitchen cupboard, which I found both practical and slightly humiliating, and I told him so, and he laughed. The house feels like mine again. That's enough. That's more than enough.